Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. We're so glad to have you all here with us and with Carrie and Claire. My name's Michelle. I'm the assistant at the Lansing Community Library. And I'm just gonna kind of hand it off to Claire, who is a member of the program committee at the library. And she will introduce Carrie, and she's got some questions lined up. All right, thanks. Claire, it's up to you.
Hey, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming. This is really exciting. I've known Carrie, I was just thinking back that I met her around 2014, and we were in the Lansing Library writing group together. And so I was lucky to hear a little pieces of this project, our changing menu, as it was happening. And I'm just going to give you just a little background about Carrie in case you didn't read it. And it kind of sums up, I think, how she would be interested in get into this book. Carrie Koplinka-Loehr learned to haul hay bales and milk cows as a teenager, then spent 3 decades communicating about agricultural issues and how they intersect with the environment. At Cornell University, she directed the Northeastern Integrated Pest Management Center, which continues to fund multi-state research and extension projects that reduce environmental risks. She also developed and led the communications team for the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program in Geneva, New York. As a freelance writer, Carrie has published in Yes Magazine, Sierra Magazine, and other venues. She lives in a student-designed solar home and is an avid gardener and land conservationist. With a master's degree in science education from Cornell University and a bachelor's degree in English from Colgate University, Carrie is a member of the Society of Environmental Journalists and the National Association of Science Writers. So thank you, Carrie, for doing this program, and we can get started.
Well, thank you so much, Claire. It's really a pleasure to be here, and also to recognize some of the people who are on the screen here. So thanks for taking the time, and hope to get to know you a little bit better throughout the hour that we have. So welcome to everybody. I, as Claire mentioned, am a Lansing resident. I live past the schools, and essentially spent a lot of my life trying to translate science from scientists to non-scientists. And actually, a little shout out to Jeanette Knapp here, who's joining us. When I first came to Cornell, I got a job as a paper grader in Jeanette's class, and I learned a lot about science writing from Jeanette. So really nice to see you here, Jeanette. Essentially, I worked at Cornell for many years doing that translation, and then began directing a center at Cornell, all with the hope that I would be able to continue writing. And anyone who has ever done any administrative work can back me up that, in fact, it's difficult to write while you're also managing a program. And I found that I wasn't doing very much writing. And so when I got to the age of 55, I kept thinking, how am I going to write? I just feel like I want to write a book, and I want to write a book with other people. And it's really hard to get it done. So I retired from Cornell. It's probably a bit premature, actually, in terms of finances, but I just went for it and decided, let's give this a try. So one of the first things I did was join the Lansing Writers Group, and that's where I met Claire. And I began doing the freelance work. And around 2017, I got an email from someone I had worked with at Cornell pretty closely, a person named Mike Hoffmann. And I'm going to show you what that email was. So this is from Mike Hoffmann. And at the time, he was directing the Cornell Institute for Climate Smart Solutions. And basically, he was thinking about writing a book on how the menu is changing, all because of climate change. And would I be interested in discussing this? And of course, I wrote him back, and I told him, yeah, this is a great idea. I wasn't really sure how far it was going to go because he was very busy, and it didn't seem like something that could be pulled off very quickly. In truth, you can see the date on this, 2017. So it wasn't pulled off very quickly. Um, but we got together, and then we began thinking about who else we might involve. And so here's the crew of folks who are involved in this project. Far left, that's me, scraping ice off of the solar panels at our place in Lansing. We were living off grid. And as I'm scraping, I'm not sure why I'm smiling in this picture, but I was thinking, this is just not going to work for most people because it hardly works for me. And I'm pretty hardcore about this. And not everybody's going to live off grid. And maybe it doesn't even make sense to live off grid. So could we do something differently here? There's Mike Hoffmann in the middle. And he was the prime mover behind the project. He had the vision and roped me in very early. On the far right is Danielle Eiseman. And Danielle is the senior lecturer in the Department of Communications right now, but she has a former life. And that former life is as a chef. And this photo is taken from when she was on television for her cooking program. And at the bottom is a woman named Lindsay Potoff, who at the time was a first-year student at Cornell. And when we decided we needed an artist for the book, Danielle put out the call to students, and Lindsay applied. And when she walked into the office, Danielle said, "Is this something that you think you could do?" And Lindsay said, "Well, let me try. Give me an hour." And so she walked out of the office and came back with a beautiful drawing of a sheaf of wheat, very much like the one that's on the cover of the book, actually. And basically, Danielle said, "You're hired. We would love to work with you." And so our group spanned quite a few decades. Mike's a decade older than I am, and Danielle's at least a decade younger than I am. And then Lindsay was about 18 or 19. So that intergenerational connection turned out to be pretty fascinating for all of us because we had really different knowledge bases. Here's an example of one of Lindsay's drawings. She would come to us with pencil sketches that looked very similar to this, but she wouldn't have inked them yet. And then when we were sure that it's what we wanted, she would ink in the illustrations. So we wanted to intersperse artwork throughout. We just felt like books about science that are aimed for a lay audience can be a bit dry. And we really wanted high schoolers to be able to understand the book. It needed to be science-based because Mike Hoffmann was first and foremost a scientist. His background is in entomology. And so pretty much every sentence we backed up with a scientific paper. We wanted to include stories about real people who are combating climate change. And those would be farmers, managers of maybe vegetable processing companies. We wanted to include policymakers. And that was my part of the book that I was most passionate about. I said to Mike, I want to be interviewing people about their lives and the kinds of situations they've entered into and then what they're doing about it. So here's a real quick overview in the last 5 bullets about what this book is all about. It's essentially about how our food is a result of global food systems. We like to think that we get a lot of what we eat locally, but in fact, it is a very complex system. And climate change is affecting that system in ways that even we, when we began the book, had no idea about. We wanted to teach people about plants and crops because a lot of folks don't realize how plants grow and what they need. And the 4th bullet, the menu, is essentially the scaffolding on which we hung the entire book. It's organized like a menu once you get past the information about plants, crops, and climate change. And then we end with solutions and what people can be doing to just hold up their part of how to make change for the climate. So why this book? Well, the threat of climate change is very real. When we started it, this book, it was a little less real than it even is today. We realized that everybody eats and everyone drinks, and we were looking for a way to get them in the gut, literally. And in doing so, explain concepts about what's happening in our world today. So that's how we ended up, that's the premise that we ended up working with. I'm going to give you 3 examples of major concepts and how we illustrated them in the book. This was an idea that Mike Hoffmann wanted to get across, and Lindsay rendered it with an illustration. And this illustration is meant to depict how the globe, our world with its atmosphere, is similar to an apple with its peel. And essentially, our atmosphere at 7 miles high, only 7 miles high, is a bit like the peel of an apple. And it's somewhat of a fragile system if you think of the entire Earth, that everything that happens in terms of weather and everything we need to breathe and everything we exhale is all within that 7 miles, essentially as high as you might fly on a cross-country flight. Here's another concept that Lindsay illustrated and kind of shows, well, what are the biggest producers of greenhouse gases in the United States? Transportation leads the way, followed by electricity that's used for manufacturing, for example. Industry, 22%, residential and commercial are at 12%, and agriculture is at 9%. Now, you might think that that's kind of a small percentage to focus on, but in fact, it translates to a lot of big changes that are needed for agriculture. And then one final example of how we try to marry concepts with illustrations is in this example here, where animals are standing on the size of real estate that they require to produce 1 unit of protein. And so if you look below the feet of the cow there, you can see rice, corn, and pulse crops, which are, for example, lentils. Rice takes 2% of what it takes to produce the same unit of protein that beef would occupy. So beef is the leader in terms of how much land it takes. It takes land to grow corn, for example, and grow the other grains that a cow will eat. And not all of those lands are marginal. Many of them could be used to produce crops or to sequester carbon by way of other plants or forests. So you get a sense here that beef is the greatest land user, and then followed by pork, and finally wheat and rice on the bottom. You can see how eggs and dairy stack up on the right-hand side. So the heart of the menu, the heart of the book is the menu. And we begin with drinks and salads. We progress to the main dishes and sides. We end with desserts and coffee. And all along, we try to celebrate the food. And that's where Danielle's contribution was so essential, because she could, off the top of her head, just write about delicacies that we all know. But for her, my mouth was almost watering as she was describing some of these cheeses and some of these desserts. And so she would write the introductions to these chapters, and then Mike and I would grind away at the facts and the figures throughout the chapter. So we tried to start with a celebration of foods, talk about where they come from, who cares, how it's changing, and then what can be done. And each chapter that relates to the menu has this format. And then we end with solutions and hope. When we talk about farmers being stewards of the land, scientists finding solutions, and food businesses having a really important role to play. Here's just a little example of the kinds of things that we cover under hope, because I know climate change can be very overwhelming. And you already are taking care of the first bullet because you're thinking about these issues and you're becoming more climate change literate. We're talking about it right now, and I'm sure you've talked many, many times in the past year about climate change. Considering a plant-based diet is important, and thinking about your carbon footprint. Appreciating those who supply the menu. You know, I find before every one of my meals, I think about all of the hands that my food had to pass through to get to the plate. And it's pretty daunting, but it does engender gratitude. And then getting involved. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention students who were part of this project and did some initial research for us, and then helped with the website that I'll speak about later. But those are some of the students who helped with the project. And then we also got funding from a number of sources. And I just mentioned those here. So I'll stop with the PowerPoint because I know there's such a thing as death by PowerPoint. And I can bring up some of those PowerPoint slides in a little while when I talk to you about some of the other topics, but it's very nice to see faces. So Claire had asked if I would talk about the writing process, given that she and I met in a writing group, and she and I are very interested in the writing angle. So I'm going to talk about that for a moment, just answer a few of her queries to me. She was very curious about how 3 authors with 3 different styles turned out a book together. And frankly, I wish I'd done a little bit more research on this before I launched into starting a project, 5 years ago, because there were some challenges. So Mike was brought up in the scientific tradition, and he wrote in passive voice. And I learned through Jeanette Knapp and many others that no. If you are going to write a trade book, you do not want to write in passive voice. And even if you were going to write a book that Cornell Press puts out, they said to us, no passive voice, no. So I had already been converting Mike's prose to more active voice. But it was a pursuit that I began at the beginning, and I went all the way to the end. And even to the last day, I was still working on that. And he is a brilliant man, and we have 2 different writing styles. So that was really interesting. And Danielle had her own writing style. So the way that we handled it was that we shared every word that we wrote with the other 2 authors. And when they signed off, then we went ahead and we saved that final version, the temporary version, with the date of the last person who signed off. And then we began collecting all of those. And once we had a complete manuscript that was as good as we could get it, and I had gone through for flagging as many clarity issues as I could, and we fixed those. Then we found an editor, and this is where the Podell grant came in. That grant from Cornell allowed us to hire an editor, and editors get a lot more than I was getting for the project. And we wanted to make sure that we gave her something that was as good as we could get, because it was expensive to have it edited. But as a developmental editor, she was able to blend our voices, and that was really her gift. Her name was Kathleen Carnes, and she calls herself the book coach. And she used to, interestingly enough, she used to work as an editor in Ithaca. And so Kathleen was golden. She took our voices and she kind of struck a happy medium. And she called her editing death by 1,000 paper cuts. She would cut out a word here and cut out a word there and cut out another word. And before we knew it, she was definitely paring the document down to make it much more efficient. So that was extremely valuable. And then when Kathleen was done and we had actually incorporated all of her changes, we were able to give it to Cornell, and Cornell's copy editor went after it again.
Oh, you muted yourself.
So the book itself, I'll talk just a little bit about how the three of us work to coordinate our citations, because the book has 700 citations, and we tried to back up everything that we said with a scientific publication, so that we had many more citations and we needed to finally pare down at the end. But one of the ways that librarians were very helpful to us was they explained a citation management system called Zotero. And when I heard about it, I was just sold on the idea. And I convinced Mike and Danielle that we should form a group and we should all use Zotero. So anytime anyone researched something and found a great article, they could click an icon at the top of their screen and the citation would be captured in Zotero and it would become part of our library. And then we always had that to go back to. And for every end note, we could pull the citation from our library into our document. And that was a complete lifesaver. So yay for librarians for teaching us about that. We met in person a lot, the three authors, and we also met on the phone. And so we had regular meetings, sometimes a couple of times a week. And we had an Excel spreadsheet that showed every chapter, the parts of the chapter, who was writing them, when they were due. And we really tried to keep to that. It was not always possible because sometimes chapters took longer than we thought. I had mentioned the Lansing Writers Group earlier, but that group, because I had homework and we were going to meet on Thursday nights, I needed to write my assignment. And I took it very seriously, and you needed to show up and you needed to have copies and you shared them. And it was instant feedback. And so I felt like, wow, this is actually causing me to do my homework. So that was great. And I think I learned a lot of patience and persistence. I really loved working with others because I felt like I could, run my troubles by them. They could share their troubles with me. We could kind of collaborate on the spot. And I think that was really, really great. So I want to open it up to Claire's questions, and I'll go back to slides if I need to answer anything, but then I want to make sure that people have a chance to ask their questions. So go at it, Claire.
So when I was reading and also during the group, we would learn about various food items and how they are impacted by climate change. There were several investigations for the book, and Carrie would be getting these people from I didn't know where, how she found these people doing different things to keep their crops going. And that was really kind of fascinating. So I thought it would be fun for her to talk about one of her sources and how she got the person to talk with her so frankly, and what she discovered about their production methodology during the time.
Great. So I'll start just by answering without slides, and then I do have a couple of slides that relate, so I'll pull those up. In terms of finding these people, we used all methods possible. So Mike has a Rolodex in his head and has an immense set of contacts from all of his conferences and things. And so we started with a list that he had and some research that I did about kind of people who are thinking about these issues. We had decided when we started the book that we were not going to go back into time and try to capture those audiences that were climate deniers. We just felt like we needed to start from somewhere, and that it wasn't truthful to who we were to put forth the argument that climate deniers put forth. So we started from that basis, that we believe that the climate is changing and it's largely through human activity. So that meant I then needed to figure out, okay, who is willing to talk to me about this? And in thinking about farmers, I realized that farmers are very happy to tell you stories about how things are different now than how they used to be. They might not use the words climate change, but they are eager to say that they can plant different cultivars now than they could when their grandfather was planting trees, for example. So I needed to do a little decoding in when they first spoke with me, but I found growers who were very eager to talk about what they do. And in fact, I think there was only one person who said she would not talk to me. She was from a very large wine company. And I approached her a number of times because they were doing some innovative things. And she basically finally said, I don't think so. But other than that, it was pretty cool how many people were willing to say something. And I'll just say the first person I started with was actually the roaster who was with Copper Horse Coffee in Brooktondale, because we knew that we were going to focus on coffee, and we had to keep trying to marry the topics we were writing about with the people that I was going to interview. So something needed to be written first, and this was the trickiest part of the book, before I could then write up an interview with somebody who was actually growing that crop or handling that crop. So with Copper Horse Coffee, they get their beans from around the world, but I went and I met there while they were roasting, and I spoke with Jesse Harriet about what he does, and then ended up writing that up as a prototype, and then we included it in the book, which was really cool. So let me show you just a little bit of an overview of why we wanted to talk about people. We just felt like, let's put a human face on all of this, and let's choose foods that are most imperiled. And that meant we had to do a lot of research to figure that out too, because starting with just an idea was very different from figuring out, well, what crops do we really want to write about? Is it worth writing about avocados? Yes, turns out it was. Or olives? Yes, again. We wanted to balance the professions of these people that we spoke to, and also the genders. So I had to cross some people off the list, just because of the factors we were considering. And we didn't want everyone to be from New York, so we went for geographic spread. They had to have somewhat of a compelling story, and of course, be very willing. So that was the background on all this. Here on this photograph.
Uh-oh, frozen. Can you text her?
Carrie?
I can
Well-
text you.
Okay, I can too.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess it would be on her end. She might have to reboot.
Yeah, she'll probably come right back on.
Yeah.
Just a moment, folks.
I do hope she comes back. It
Well, the technology's great when it works.
sure is. Okay, looks like she's disappeared completely, so hopefully she will come back.
I'm trying to message her.
Are you reaching out to her, Claire?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I just sent her a text.
Okay. I
I
don't see
wonder
her. I
if
don't
she's
see her popping back in either, so.
okay. Hmm.
Sorry, folks.
She's having trouble getting on.
Okay.
Well, let's give her another few minutes. Ooh.
Oh, boy.
She wants to know. Yes, everyone's still here. Okay, she doesn't know what happened. Oh, yep, here she is.
Yay.
Carrie? Carrie? I saw you.
I let her in.
I did.
Let's
There
see.
she is. She can't.
Oh, there she is.
I have no idea what that was, but all of a sudden there was nothing. So
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I watch interviews all the time with Maria Shriver on Instagram. She's always losing people. And these are people who are like, you know, so, and this type of thing happens a lot. So, we should have a disclaimer at the beginning that, please have a few
you, the
breathing
disclaimer is you'll vaporize partway through.
Yeah. Okay, so you were talking about
Yes.
interviewing the Copper Horse Coffee and
Yes, and I'll just show you another fellow I interviewed, and then I will allow the next question.
okay.
So let's just see if we can pull him up because he's got a very sweet. Here's a listing of the people that we interviewed. You can see it kind of spans different professions, and I think it's about 11 different locations, a couple of different continents even.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share a moment about a person named Tylen Markle, who's at the time was a graduate student at NYU. And he was studying in a beautiful place of Arizona. And he was studying hops, which hops, you can see an illustration there. That's one of the ingredients of beer. And he was trying to find wild hops so that they could learn about the genetic diversity of those hops and protect them as the climate begins to change, and possibly breed hops that are more tolerant for heat and other conditions that are happening. And so he was a particularly charming person to talk to, and very, very, as you can see from his photograph, very excited about what he does. And so there's an interview with him in this book. I won't take the time to read it unless people simply don't have any questions. We could use it as filler at the end. But
So the next question was, what promotion efforts have been used to get the word out about the book? Because I know from just working with people who write books all the time in the history department that it is very hard to market your own book while you've got other stuff going on. And I'm just wondering how you guys do it.
Well, we have all taken our turns, and we have been on very small venues together. So, for example, the three of us were on the MV Manhattan on Cayuga Lake, attempting to talk about the book as people were perhaps more interested in looking at the lake and chatting with each other. And so that was one of our more challenging venues, where the idea was we would talk about climate change and talk about the book, and we had all these props and everything. And I don't know if I would repeat that particular example, but we have given lectures and seminars to, for example, the Culinary Institute of America, Cornell, Columbia. And then we've presented to book groups. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has a book group, and they read our changing menu. And so we presented to that group, which was really nice. And then I've spoken to food co-ops, and Mike has spoken to audiences like Climate Reality and the National Extension Climate Initiative. Done interviews. Mike did one with NPR, the Weather Channel, and Nature's Newsroom. We've written blogs. We've had articles written about us, and we've also written articles. So, for example, because I went to Colgate, the Colgate magazine wanted to interview me for their food issue last fall. So I was in that one. And we've gotten kind of creative because of Danielle and her cadre of students who are learning about climate communication. They have done a lot with Twitter and Instagram, and done a bunch of short little videos, including one that it was about a comedian, I think. So she has done quite a bit with her students and social media. So again, sort of an indication of the generations represented by our team, where the younger ones are doing much more with social media, and maybe the older ones are doing much more with writing articles and things.
Well, that's quite a bit of outreach to promote a book. That's quite a bit. I noticed today, I was looking through something, and Mike Hoffmann is giving a talk on this book in a couple weeks through an extension program. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, he has really been a trooper with so many different talks, and he's also tried to get the word out about the book by applying for different awards like the James Beard Award, and he and I collaborated on one for the National Association of Science Writers. And so we figure every time that we apply, it introduces someone else to the book.
Great. That's really good. Now, I know that you have a website for the book, and I wondered if you could share a little bit about the goal of the site and who maintains it.
Sure. And let's see, I hope I don't get disconnected again by sharing one more little piece here, but there's the website. It's ourchangingmenu.com, and there are a lot of color images, which is something that we were not able to achieve with the book because we wanted to keep the cost down. So we went with just black ink for the book, and the line drawings, we had that in mind right from the beginning. The line drawings are done in shades of gray and black, so they were able to be printed in one color. But with a website, we didn't have that restriction. And so the website was started because we felt like the information was changing so rapidly that we were capturing what was true at a moment in time, and that we were going to be learning more and more. And through the site, we were able to post information right up to the moment, as far as news breaking things. It also has this ingredient database where you can click on any number of different foods, and up will come the different challenges for growing that food now, climate change challenges.
Wow.
So we had help from students to do this website, and two in particular actually designed it and figured out a way to integrate the database into the website, which was well beyond what the 3 authors could handle. And right now it's being maintained by a combination. Cornell had agreed to help out at the beginning, and now number of people are keeping it going. I think students are still contributing to it. So I'll stop sharing.
Okay,
So
I
it
think
doesn't boot me off.
that's really neat though. So anybody could go to that site and see
Oh yeah.
how our changing menu, how food is affected.
Yes.
So
Yes.
where can folks buy the book if they're interested?
It's available through Amazon, and also through Cornell University Press, and also Audible. And there's the paper version, but there's also an ebook version.
Oh,
So if you go to Cornell University Press's website, you can get a discount on the book with a code. I'm going to give you that code. I'm nervous to share my screen because it booted me out one time, but here's the code. I'll just show it here. There it is.
flyer.
09 flyer. It's kind of a strange code.
Okay.
I feel like we should give other people a chance to talk and ask questions
Yeah.
and reflect.
Who
Feeling
else-
very one-sided.
Yes, who else has questions? Janet? Could you unmute? Want me to unmute you?
That's good.
I'm unmuted.
Oh,
Great.
great. Great.
I would like to ask about something I and my colleagues have been working on, which is, I'm not going to explain that, but the subject of the minute is really compassionate choice of foods, because the factory farming is so terrible. So we're not telling people they have to be vegetarian. We're just suggesting that they find out where the food is from, and if it's a good place to get it from there. But one thing we have been talking about is meat. Let's say lamb. If it comes from a farm that is very conscious of these things, is it, what would you say about meat? And I'm aware that that pastures can also hold carbon. So they're not just feed cows, they're also they're storing carbon. So so I just wondered what you would say about meat at this point.
So meat's just a very interesting question, because there are countries in the world that really desperately need sources of protein. And I think for some of those countries, meat serves a critical purpose for nutrition. So I'll just say that at the outset. The rest of my answer will be focused more on the US, because I think in the US we have a lot of choices. And in the book, we really gear our comments to US readers, primarily because we're very well off country and we have the means to make changes. For something like lamb, it's in a little bit of a different category than beef. And one of the reasons why beef is so problematic is because beef cattle are ruminants and dairy cows are ruminants. And that means that they are producing methane. They're literally burping and farting methane a lot, and that adds up. And it's incredible how much it adds up. So we're in the process of being able to refine the diets for cows so that they don't produce as much methane, but we're really not fully there yet, because once you start playing around with the diet, then you have some other consequences, and it's a delicate balance. There are also some new products, and we mention some of those in the book, that can decrease methane production. If we could get some of those in really common use, and farmers could be happy about what they're still getting in terms of product, I think that would be a huge step forward. When it comes to something like lamb, I still think that there is the protein conversion issue where you're feeding, if they are not feeding on marginal pasture lands, and you are doing supplemental feeding for them, which is really true for the bulk of beef, for example. Those beef are not on happy little pastures. We're fattening them up with corn. With lamb, if we were able to, have them on some marginal lands, that might be a different issue. But I do think the protein conversion question is something we have to pay attention to. So a long time ago, I made a decision that I was not going to eat red meat, and I just eat occasional fish, and I do eat some dairy products, but I have a largely plant-based diet just because it seems to cohere with all of these ideas. And again, everyone is going to make a different decision, but that's the one that I made.
Another question. Sorry.
Sally, I think.
Oh, Sally.
Yes, thank you. In your original chart, with the illustration of the cow, you called it beef and mutton, and I think of mutton as sheep, lamb,
Yes.
and but they were lumped together, and I would think the mutton would be less
Yeah.
annoying, less.
I think they are separate. Let's just see. Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. They are on there together. That's a good question. So
which portion would be 30% for the mutton, and
that's a very good question, Sally. And maybe if you are willing to
I
put your
ask as a
email-
lamb eater, but not a beef eater.
Yeah. So I would like to find out the answer to that and then email you why we decided to lump those together.
Okay.
So if you want to give me, I can also put my email in the chat, but if you want to give me yours, then I'll see if I can find out for you, because I don't know why we lumped them. And it does seem a little misleading, actually. Good question.
And I would add what Janet was speaking about is she and I and two others of us here are Quakers. We belong to 15th Street monthly meeting in New York City, and we're very concerned about climate change. And so we've been working on a minute for our meeting and for a wider group to encourage mindful eating and compassion for animals. And really, that's what brought us here. We wanted to know more about what's in your book.
Uh-huh.
That's cool. I want to point this question out because I think it's really helpful to think about what's in the book, but also what's on your website. And here's the question. Can you give an example of one menu item discussed in your book and what we learn about its relationship to climate change? So I'm just going to just say that I just went to the website and looked up bananas and found from that website there's a nice paragraph which explains that climate change is responsible for an increase in risk of infection by black leaf streak disease in the Caribbean and Latin America because of warming condition and increased wetness of leaves. And the only reason and then I'll let you take over, Carrie, since it's your book talk. But the only reason, the only reason I'm pointing it out is because there's a wealth of information on that website. It's amazing. I only went to it like in June, but I forgot about that. But anyway, so the question is just something from the book and the way climate change is affecting it.
Yeah, just to backtrack 1 second, that the website grew out of a chart that we made for the book. And it got to be so big that we finally decided, oh my gosh, I don't think we, Mike Hoffmann and I and Danielle, we all decided we don't think we can include the chart in the book, but it was supposed to be included in the book for many, many months. We were counting on this. And then finally we converted it over to that database on the website. I think one thing that I really started to fall in love with was the story about avocados. Kind of got turned on to avocados because we have a daughter who lives in California, and there are 2 avocado trees in her backyard, and we began picking them, and I had a sense of how long it takes for an avocado to grow, which is actually a very long time. It can take about a year for the whole process, and then finally you have this wonderful fruit. And so in writing about the book, I learned, okay, they have good fats in the avocado, and they have twice the potassium of a banana, and it's like really vitamin C and all these nice things about avocados. But many, many of our avocados today come from Mexico. And one of the things happening in Mexico is you have a problem with cartels, which this hit the news, I think it was last month. And some are coming from Peru and from Chile. And some of the production areas are relying on glacial melt. And as the glaciers melt, the water is being used and it's not being replenished because the glaciers are going away. And so there's the possibility that avocados could be greatly threatened. I mean, we could, by 2040, could maybe see 40 to 60% fewer avocados. And I have some mixed feelings now about avocados because it takes a lot of water to grow them. And I just found that this I sort of developed both an affinity for them, but also a little sadness around that. And that was true with some other items too. Mike Hoffmann was feeling that way about coffee because Arabica coffee is one of the best tasting coffees, and it's very particular about where it grows. And it likes to grow in high altitudes. And as those areas are warming, there's no place else to go up. Just can only go so far up a mountain. So I know Mike would probably choose coffee as his beloved item that he learned so much about.
Mary has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also, I just read an article last week about the deforestation that's happening in Mexico because of avocados. So I hadn't known that, and it was, I'm really sad because I love avocados, but the pictures are just horrible. They're just chopping down complete mountainsides to have avocado farms or plantations.
Yes, huge issue. And yeah, thanks for mentioning that, because that is one of the biggest problems, deforestation. So then you lose that carbon sink and the biodiversity, and it's very problematic. Other questions?
Well, this has been a very interesting lots to talk about here.
Thanks so much for your interest.
Yeah. So, oh, Janet has her hand up. Can you unmute, Janet? You're muted.
Okay, unmute.
Janet.
I just wondered if you, since it's called a changing menu, menus, as I think about menus, I'm wondering, what do you have for dinner? What's a dinner that you might have?
That I personally would have.
Yeah, yeah.
I can tell you what I had. Last night I had tofu and broccoli and rice. And let's see, one of the soup that I'm going to probably make tomorrow is Indonesian soup that has cabbage and sweet potatoes and actually peanut butter in it, which I thought was sort of gross when I heard about it, but then I tasted it and it was really delicious. A lot of ginger. Yeah, I try to have as many vegetables as possible, because I had read one time that of your plate, half of it should be vegetables. At the time I was like, really? But I think that's probably true, especially as I age. I think probably more vegetables and less of some other things.
There's a message here for Carrie from Amy Newman. Thank you. This was a wonderful program.
Thank you, Amy. It's really nice to see all of you. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Carrie, for doing this for us. This was very interesting. You can always contact me either which way. If you want to speak to Carrie, or if Carrie, you need to reach out to someone, you can go through me and I'll try to connect you. I will try to post this recording tomorrow on the Lansing Community Library's website, if I can figure out how to do it correctly. And I will stop the recording now. And then if there's anything else anybody wants to say or ask, please feel free. Otherwise, have a great night.
Well, there's